Let me say something that might make you shift in your seat a little. Imagine I'm sitting right next to you right now, lowering my voice so nobody else hears this. What if I told you that most men work incredibly hard to get women to like them, and that effort is exactly why they're being overlooked? Yeah, not ignored because they are not good enough, not because they lack looks or money, but because of one subtle mistake they've been taught their whole lives to make. Here's the controversial part. The way women treat you is often a reaction, not a decision. It's not something they sit down and plan. It happens automatically based on the signals you give off. And most men are broadcasting the wrong signal without realizing it. We've been told to chase, to impress, to prove our value, to be endlessly agreeable. Sounds logical, right? But in the real world, that approach quietly drains respect, not attraction, respect. And once respect drops, everything else follows. The texts get shorter, the enthusiasm fades, the dynamic shifts. Suddenly, you're trying harder while getting less. This video isn't about tricks, manipulation, or pretending to be someone you're not. That stuff falls apart fast. This is about one internal shift, done once, that changes how people, especially women, respond to you over time. Not because you demand better treatment, but because you naturally invite it. And before you jump to conclusions, no, this isn't about being rude, cold, or alpha in some cartoonish way. It's actually the opposite. It's about clarity, about self-respect that doesn't need to be announced, about moving through the world like you don't need permission to take up space. When that switch flips, women don't just notice. It changes how conversations flow, how they look at you, how they test you, and how seriously they take you. And the wild part? You don't need to do this over and over. You do it once, internally, and it quietly reshapes your behavior from the inside out. Most men never learn this because it doesn't sell well as advice. It's not flashy. It doesn't feed insecurity, but it works because it aligns how you see yourself with how others experience you. And once that alignment happens, the difference in how women treat you becomes impossible to ignore. You 1. Stop trying to be liked. Why approval is killing respect. Let me start this the same way I'd say it if you were sitting right next to me. If you're constantly trying to be liked by women, you're quietly training them not to respect you. That probably stings a little. But stay with me, because this one idea alone flips almost everything most men have been taught. From an early age, men learn that being good means being agreeable, be polite, be understanding, don't cause friction, especially with women. So over time, you start editing yourself without noticing. You soften opinions. You laugh at jokes you don't actually find funny. You say yes when you mean no. None of this feels extreme. It feels normal. But here's the controversial truth. Approval seeking doesn't come across as kindness. It comes across as uncertainty. The moment you're focused on being liked, your behavior becomes reactive. You're constantly checking the room. Did that land well? Did she approve of that comment? Should I explain myself more? That mental position, seeking feedback in real time, is felt instantly. Not on a logical level, but on an emotional one. Women don't respond strongly to men who want approval. They respond to men who assume their own value without needing permission. And no, this isn't about being rude, cold, or dismissive. That's not confidence. That's insecurity with sharp edges. Real confidence is quiet. It doesn't argue. It doesn't over-explain. It doesn't rush to smooth over every moment of tension. Here's an easy example. Picture two men. One agrees with everything, avoids disagreement, and constantly adjusts himself to keep things comfortable. The other is calm, respectful, but clearly willing to disagree and stand by it. He doesn't push, he doesn't convince, he just exists as he is. Which one feels more solid? Which one feels like you know where he stands? Respect grows from self-trust and consistency, not from flexibility with no center. The reason this lesson is hard for most men is simple. Approval feels safe. Disapproval feels risky. But respect and attraction aren't built in safety, they're built in clarity. When you're okay with not being liked by everyone, something shifts in how you carry yourself. Your words slow down, your body language settles, you stop performing, and that's when the dynamic changes. Women begin responding differently, not because you did something flashy, but because you stopped doing something draining. Conversations feel less forced, you're tested less, there's less pushback because there's nothing needy to push against. Trying to be liked puts women in the role of judge. Letting go of that need puts you back on equal footing. This isn't about winning interactions. It's about not handing over authority you never needed to give away in the first place. When you stop chasing approval, you don't become colder, you become clearer. And clarity is rare. That's why it's powerful. That's why it changes how women treat you, not because you demanded respect, but because you finally stopped asking for permission to have it. 2. Your time is either valuable or disposable. You choose which one. Let me put this in a way that's impossible to misunderstand. If you treat your time like it doesn't matter, other people, especially women, will follow your lead. Not out of cruelty, not out of strategy, simply because humans take cues from behavior, not intentions. Most men don't realize they're signaling low value with their time because it's wrapped in something that looks positive. Being available, being responsive, being easygoing. You answer instantly. You rearrange your schedule. You wait around just in case plans come together. On the surface, that looks generous, but underneath it sends a very different message. It says, my time is flexible because it's not anchored to anything important. Here's the controversial part. It's not how much time you give that matters. It's how easily you give it up. When you're always available, your presence becomes predictable. And predictability without purpose turns into disposability. Not because someone dislikes you, but because there's no cost attached to accessing you. Think about this. Anything valuable has boundaries. Scarcity isn't about playing games, it's about having a life that's already full. Men who are respected don't announce that they're busy. They don't post about it, they don't explain it. Their schedule simply reflects priorities, and that quiet consistency does more than any clever line ever could. Now let's clear something up, because this gets misunderstood fast. This is not about ignoring messages, delaying replies on purpose, or acting unavailable to provoke interest. That's still reactive behavior, it's just wearing a different mask. This is about genuinely valuing your own time enough to protect it. When you drop everything the moment someone reaches out, you're saying your life pauses on external demand. When you respond when it fits naturally into your rhythm, you're saying your life has momentum. Women notice this immediately. Plans with you feel more intentional. Conversations feel more focused. There's a sense that time spent together actually means something, because it's not endless and undefined. And here's where the dynamic really shifts. When your time has weight, people show up differently. They're more punctual, they're more engaged, they respect the window they're given because you do. Men often try to earn better treatment by giving more availability, more reassurance, more effort. But value doesn't increase through overextension. It increases through discernment. Choosing when to say yes is just as important as knowing how to say no. And the irony? When you stop bending your life around other people's convenience, you actually become easier to be around. There's less resentment, less unspoken frustration. You're present when you're there, not half there because you gave too much. This one shift, treating your time like it matters, changes how women experience you. You're no longer filling space, you're creating moments. Your time is either something people respect or something they assume will always be there. And the moment you decide which one it is, everyone else adjusts accordingly, without a single conversation needing to happen. 3. Women respond to standards, not promises. Let me say this in a way that hits close to home. Most men don't struggle because they lack good intentions. They struggle because they believe intentions are enough. You want to be better. You want to show up. You want to be the kind of man who's respected, and you assume that wanting it, saying it, should count for something. But in reality, it doesn't. Women don't respond to what you say you'll do. They respond to what you consistently tolerate and enforce. That's where standards live. Quiet, unspoken, visible only through behavior. A lot of men think having standards means making rules or giving ultimatums. It doesn't. Standards are internal. They're the lines you don't explain, don't negotiate, and don't feel guilty about. And if we're being honest, most men don't struggle with knowing what their standards are. They struggle with standing by them when there's something to lose. You've probably felt that tension before. The moment where something doesn't sit right, but you let it slide. Not because you're weak, but because you don't want to disrupt the connection. So you tell yourself it's not a big deal. You minimize it. You promise yourself you'll speak up next time. That's not kindness, that's self-abandonment. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Every time you ignore your own standards, you train people how to treat you. Not through confrontation, but through allowance. Women don't test standards to be difficult. They test to understand where the edges are. If there are no edges, there's nothing to lean against, nothing to respect, nothing to feel secure around. Standards create stability. They say, this is what's acceptable in my world. And that stability is felt emotionally, not logically. It's why a man with clear standards doesn't need to explain himself constantly. His behavior already does the talking. Promises are easy. They cost nothing. Anyone can say what they want to be. Standards cost comfort. They cost the approval you're tempted to chase. And that's exactly why they matter. When you live by standards, you don't argue your value. You don't campaign for respect. You don't need to convince anyone that you deserve better treatment. You simply remove yourself from what doesn't align. And that silence speaks louder than any speech ever could. This isn't about controlling anyone else. It's about controlling what you allow access to you. When you stop over-explaining and start quietly choosing alignment, the dynamic changes. Women respond to that shift because it feels grounded, it feels safe, it feels real. You don't need perfect confidence, you don't need the right words, you don't need to be flawless, you just need to stop betraying yourself to keep someone else comfortable. The moment your actions line up with your standards, something clicks, not just in how women treat you, but in how you see yourself. And once that alignment is there, respect stops being something you hope for and starts being something you naturally experience. 4. Emotional control beats emotional expression. Let's slow this down for a moment because this is where a lot of men get confused, and if we're being honest, a little lazy. Somewhere along the way, many men were told that emotional expression is the same thing as emotional maturity, that if you just say everything you feel all the time, you're being real and healthy. That idea sounds good. It even feels good. But it's incomplete, and when misunderstood, it quietly works against you. Here's the criticism part, and I'm saying this calmly on purpose. Too many men use emotional expression as a substitute for emotional control. They vent instead of reflect. They react instead of respond. They unload instead of process. And then they're surprised when respect slowly fades. Being emotional isn't the problem. Being unmanaged is. Emotional control doesn't mean suppression. It doesn't mean pretending you don't feel things. It means you don't let your emotions drive the steering wheel in real time. You notice them, you understand them, and then you choose what to do next. That pause, that space between feeling and action, is where maturity lives. A lot of men skip that part. They say what they feel the moment they feel it. They justify it by calling it honesty. But honesty without regulation often turns into pressure. And pressure, even when unintended, is uncomfortable. Women don't respond well to emotional unpredictability, not because they lack empathy, but because instability doesn't feel safe. When emotions spill out without control, the dynamic shifts. You're no longer grounded, you're no longer steady, you're asking someone else to hold emotional weight you should be carrying yourself. That's the wake-up call. You are responsible for your emotional state, not in a harsh way, in a grown man way. Emotional control is attractive because it signals leadership, internally first. It says, I can experience intensity without becoming it. That's rare. And rarity creates impact. This doesn't mean you never open up. It means you choose when, how, and why. You don't process emotions at someone. You process them, then communicate from clarity instead of chaos. There's a big difference between sharing and dumping, between vulnerability and volatility. Men who master emotional control don't become colder, they become calmer. Their presence feels steady. Their reactions are measured. Their words carry weight because they're not thrown around impulsively. And here's the part most men don't want to hear. If you constantly express every frustration, insecurity, or fear the moment it arises, you're not being brave. You're avoiding the work of self-regulation. That work matters. Because women aren't looking for a man who never feels. They're looking for a man who can feel deeply without collapsing into it. Someone whose emotions don't create emotional labor for others. This is where respect quietly grows. When you stop reacting, people stop bracing. When you stop oversharing, people start listening. When you stop needing immediate emotional release, your presence becomes grounding instead of draining. And that doesn't just change how women treat you, it changes how you experience yourself. Here's the advice part. Simple, direct, no drama, slow down. Before you speak, ask yourself, am I expressing this to create clarity or to release tension? Am I choosing this moment or is the emotion choosing for me? You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be responsible. Emotional control is not about dominance or silence. It's about composure, about being the same man under pressure that you are when things are easy. That consistency builds trust. That trust builds respect. And that respect changes the entire dynamic without you ever needing to explain yourself. This isn't about hiding who you are. It's about becoming someone others feel steady around. And when that happens, the way women respond to you shifts, naturally, quietly, and permanently. 5. You don't set the frame, your behavior does. Let's end this with something most men don't want to accept at first, but feel immediately once they do. You don't get to decide how people treat you by what you say. You decide it by what you repeatedly allow. The frame of every interaction is set long before words ever matter. A lot of men believe they can talk their way into respect, explain themselves into better treatment, clarify intentions enough times and things will improve, but that's not how human dynamics work. The frame is created silently, through consistency. Your behavior is always teaching, even when you're quiet, especially when you're quiet. If you tolerate being ignored, rushed, minimized, or taken for granted, that becomes the frame. Not because someone is malicious, but because you showed, through action, that it's acceptable. People rarely question the rules you seem comfortable living by. This is where many men unintentionally weaken their position. They notice something feels off, but instead of adjusting behavior, they try to fix the feeling with words. More reassurance, more explanation, more effort. And each time, the frame tilts further away from them. Frames don't change through negotiation. They change through consistency. When your actions line up with self-respect, the frame corrects itself. You don't announce boundaries. You don't demand better treatment. You simply move differently. You respond differently. You disengage when something doesn't align, and you do it without drama. That calm withdrawal is louder than any confrontation. Women respond to behavioral clarity because it removes confusion. There's no guessing where you stand, no wondering what you'll tolerate. That certainty creates a different emotional response, one rooted in respect. Here's the uncomfortable part. If you feel stuck in the same dynamic repeatedly, it's not because you're unlucky. It's because your behavior keeps reinforcing the same frame. And that's not a judgment. It's an opportunity. Because behavior is the easiest thing to change once you're aware of it. You don't need a new personality. You don't need better lines. You don't need to control outcomes. You need alignment. alignment between what you believe you deserve and what your actions communicate. Men who get this stop trying to manage perception. They stop chasing reactions. They stop overcorrecting. Their presence becomes steady because it's rooted in principle, not outcome. And when your behavior stops bending to keep the peace, the entire interaction recalibrates. Women don't test as much. They don't push as hard. Not because you became intimidating, but because you became consistent. Consistency removes leverage. This is the final shift, the one that ties everything together. You stop trying to control how you're seen. You stop asking for better treatment. You stop reacting emotionally. You stop explaining your worth. And instead, you let your behavior speak on your behalf. That's when the dynamic flips. Not instantly, not dramatically, but permanently. Because frames, once established through action, are very hard to argue with. You don't need to demand respect. You need to live in a way that makes disrespect feel out of place. And when you do, the way women treat you changes, not because you asked them to, but because your behavior quietly told them how. Let me end this with a statement that's going to bother some people, and if it does, that's probably a good thing. Most men aren't treated poorly by women because women are confusing or unfair. They're treated poorly because they never made the internal decision to take themselves seriously. That's the uncomfortable truth. Everything we talked about in this video points back to one moment. The moment you decide that your time, your emotions, your standards, and your behavior are not up for negotiation. Not aggressively, not loudly, just firmly, quietly, internally. Here's what makes this controversial. The shift doesn't start when women change. It starts when you do. And until that happens, no amount of advice, motivation, or confidence hacks will stick. You can memorize every rule, repeat every affirmation, and still end up in the same dynamic, because the foundation was never set. Most men wait for permission. Permission to be respected. Permission to slow down. Permission to say no. Permission to take up space. And the harsh reality is this: no one is coming to give it to you. The moment you stop waiting, everything begins to rearrange. Not because you became someone else, but because you finally became consistent. And here's the part no one tells you. This isn't just about dating. It affects how you walk into rooms, how you speak, how you handle silence, how you deal with pressure, and how people instinctively respond to you before a single word is exchanged. If any part of this video felt uncomfortably familiar, that's not an accident. That's awareness waking up. I want you to do one thing after this. Don't argue with these ideas. Don't defend old habits. Just notice. Notice where you over-explain. Notice where you overgive. Notice where you compromise your standards to keep things smooth. That awareness alone starts the shift. And if you've already experienced this, where you stopped chasing and people treated you differently, I want you to comment about it. Share what changed. Share what surprised you. I read those comments, and when I can, I reach out. Because this isn't just content, it's a conversation. You're not broken, you're not behind, you were just never shown where the real switch was. Now you know, and once you flip it, there's no going back.